you guys doing? It's been a minute. Those of you endowed with a little bit of awareness might notice I'm in new environs. This is my backyard. This is where I've been hanging out. I'm just shooting this on the fly, not a lot of preparation. We'll see how this goes. I think I'm the kind of guy who starts off experimentally and gets better and learns incrementally rather than like trying to gather all my research and bang out the best possible video for you. So the new house is great. We're living here now. The man cave is far from finished, but we'll get into that more and more as we get more into it. We've been painting the house. If you're curious, it was like an as-is sale of this house, so we've been doing a shit ton of repairs over the last few months. We've gone from having 2 months ago there was 3 feet of snow down here, and there's no way I could have been down here at all. But spring is here. It's glorious down here. Me and my partner have been down here spending a shit ton of time cleaning up a lot of these derelict woods and stuff, working on the garden. I'm really living the country life, and it is fucking good. I hauled a ton of compost today for our garden. Bought a sledgehammer, bought a wagon, bought a trailer. Just, if I did a collection update, it would all be fucking boring country vehicles and tools and implements and shit. So it'll be a while before there's a collection update. But anyway, so just to have a video to do, I'm out of videos that I shot at the last place. I may be able to crank out 1 or 2 more of stuff. I'm not sure, but stand by. But just to have a video to do, just something to talk about that I've been feeling like going for, is just, I want to talk about the discography of one of my favorite bands. And this is kind of a format of a video that I've been thinking about doing for a couple of years. I see a lot of other YouTubers who kind of like aren't of my ilk or really interest, who do these like discography rankings. I don't fucking care what you think a certain band's album is better than the other one. This is not a discography ranking whatsoever, but I thought it would be fun just to kind of go through one of my favorite bands' discographies and talk about each one of their releases, in preparation for my excitement that they are working on a new record. The band we're going to talk about today is Dawn, Sweden's Dawn. This is kind of awkward. There is literally animal shit right here in between my records. So we're roughing it out here, guys. I'm roughing it for you. Hope you appreciate it. But I really dig the background here. I love being out here in my yard. By the way, Rassel Gethy shirts, earthandsound.org. Jason Walton makes great shirts. So Dawn, or one of the first metal bands I ever heard when I was 17 years old, and what I first heard was the Sorg Postfarte Vingarflow EP. And so like that was around the time I was listening to Carcass, At the Gates, Fear Factory, shit like that. And its stark melodicism just is one of those albums, along with Nagelfar's Vitra, Cradle of Filth's Dusk and Her Embrace. Man, it's been a while. I feel like a little rusty. I hope I'm not too rusty, guys, so I apologize if I seem like I'm a little rusty. It's one of those albums that really, really drew me away from the anger and the brutality and the menacing, scary music to a more, what I thought at the time, and still I think is a little bit more artful and challenging of a form of metal, and I think it still is the kind of metal that brings me the most satisfaction as I listen to it. And so Dawn, the way that their melodicism was constructed, to me still is very unique, and at the time it was such a great step into the genre that I wound up just absolutely loving. So let's just talk about the band's discography from day one and going forward. So one of the things I feel like they don't really get credit for, and maybe never really took off the way that they should have, they started out as an absolutely devastating, brutal death metal band. They started out in 91, recorded a demo in 92. Now the only example I have of the demos is this compilation that came out on Century Media in 2014. You should be able to pick this up for cheap. It's called The Eternal Forest. The Eternal Forest. Demo years 91 to 93. So this is 3 different demos that were originally recorded by the band with Dan Svano at the helm, and they've been remastered again by Dan Svano. And they sound like, you all know, Dan Svano has such respect from me because of the way he can make albums sound amazing. Be it like, this is as fucking devastating as some Flesh Crawl material sound wise. So some of the songs on here didn't make it to the debut album. Some of the tracks are a little more simplistic, deicide-y, kind of like a seance. But very early on in that days, if you think about 1992, these guys were utterly brutal and unrelenting, but also writing really strong melodic rhythms and rhythm guitars. With also Hank Force is one of my favorite vocalists because of the later material. But going back and revisiting this as I did yesterday, I was reminded that Hank Force has always been such a fucking great vocalist. He also sings in Retaliation, which is just a fucking godly grindcore band. So I held off on getting this until a couple of years ago, just for some reason. It's like, do you want to hear one of your favorite black metal bands play death metal? I didn't really want to be disappointed, so I was kind of like, yeah, maybe I'll pick it up someday. So I did a couple of years ago, and I popped it in, and maybe it wasn't really doing it for me, but I put this in the other day because I've been kind of like prepping to do this video. You can't get this on LP, by the way, so if you're an LP head, I'll show you the other stuff on LP too, but you should be able to pick this on LP or a CD. In revisiting this with a fresh set of ears recently in preparation for this video, I was fucking blown away by how heavy these demos were and just how impressive it is to see the through line of the songs that I know so well from the debut album, which we'll talk about next, being written and performed in a more intentional death metal, brutal sort of direction. And it translates super well. I think, really, I would regret this, but I think if you could go back and keep Dawn being the brutal death metal band that they were from the start, I really feel like they would have been one of the bigger names that ever came out of Sweden in the 90s death metal scene. But they quickly turned on a dime from these demo years, and we get to the debut. So the debut is called Ner Solen Garniber for Evoger. I should have probably looked up the original correct pronunciations of these things. But I'm busy. I'm going mushroom hunting after I shoot this video, man. I got shit to do. So that's the debut, original Necropolis pressing of that. Good luck finding a copy of that for under $50 these days. There were 2 editions of this. One of them had a different logo on there. I'm not sure if there were other differences in the pressings, but when I was 17 years old and I got into college, I was able to get on the internet for the first time. And the first thing I did was I looked in the back of a Necropolis catalog and I looked up the email address to Necropolis. And I sent him an email and I said, do you have any more copies of Dawn's debut? Because I need it so badly. And they said, well, we have his copy sitting around here for $5 without the booklet, if that's all right. Sent him $5 cash, no problem. And that's, to this day, that's one of my favorite CD purchases I've ever made in my early years. But anyways, okay, so super well-crafted melodicism, just all over the place. But their music, especially on this debut, has a real complexity, and there's a lot of very kind of like challenging differentiations and various rhythms going on. And I attribute that a lot to the drummer, who wound up playing in Falconer and Mythleton, who are some amazing bands. But I really, really, really like his playing. He's kind of heavy-handed and doesn't really overthink his patterns or eccentricities when playing along with these brilliant fucking riffs. So there are a couple songs from this debut that are holdovers from the demo days. So, but they translate so well to this debut and mesh so well with the other songs that are newer and fresher on this album. But just, this is really one of the gold standards of Swedish melodicism for me. And it really doesn't, like, to pigeonhole this album or this band really as a black metal band or a death metal band would really kind of do you a disservice, and they lose some definition, I feel, by trying to push them in one direction or another. Now, going forward, the material, I will say, could more easily be identified as black metal, because you're dealing more with a kind of a long, drawn-out phrases of blasting over these triumphant, glorious melodic riffs, and just like soaring kind of reverby vocals on the later material. But on this one, it's a lot more direct. It's a lot more down to earth. Some of the patterns are a lot more kind of plodding, and just, it's a very percussively satisfying record in a lot of different ways, and I think it serves the riffs so fucking well. But this thing is just gold standard, amazing Swedish melodicism. Can't go wrong. A lot of people kind of say that Dawn are like poor man's Dissection, and again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's just, there's no point really in trying to define them that way. Dawn are Dawn to me. You can even hear a lot of the personality from Dawn in Fredrik Andersson's riffing in his other band Cranium, who cranked out 3 albums in a course of like 3 or 4 years. But that's more of like an 80s thrash band kind of thing. But so yeah, the demos are fucking great. If you're if you're not familiar with Dawn at all and you're kind of wondering if this might be your thing, and like death metal is maybe more your wheelhouse, you really can't go wrong with the demo material on here. And I feel like if you are super satisfied with the demos, this would really also be up your alley, because it really doesn't have a lot in common with what you might think of as ordinary black metal whatsoever. It's really just a unique, extraordinary record. So that was the original release, like I said. And then finally in 2014, I still can't believe there's fucking poop right here. Century Media reissued that album here on LP. Kind of a redesign a little bit, which bugs me. I wish they would, like, if you're just gonna do it, I feel like all I do on this channel is complain about fucking reissue packaging and shit. But there's a band photo there for you. Single LP, black vinyl, I believe. I haven't been in this for quite a while. I spin the CD quite regularly. But yeah, I fucking love this. It never did originally come out on LP, so I was happy that re-sleeving on camera. Century Media reissued these a couple of years ago. So that was 94. 2 years later, in 96, they recorded and released. Okay, so I guess I didn't mention that. That album, this album, was recorded with Dan Svino again in Unisound Studios. And I just, like I said, you can't go wrong with a record recorded by Dan Svino in Unisound Studios. Sounds fucking perfect. Now, they go to Abyss Studios and record Sorg Postfarte Vingerflow. Sorry, flies flew on black wings. And this is, in my opinion, one of the last albums that Tatgren recorded in Abyss Studios that sounds really good and whose personality, I think, serves the band pretty well. So This is just a 4-track EP, and it includes a cover of a song by Infernal Majesty. It's really good. I've always meant to pick up that Infernal Majesty album. It's just one you don't really see out there too often. But Century Media also did reissue this several years ago. This is one of the glossiest booklets I have in my collection. Just, can you believe that? Great band photos. So this, I think, finds the band moving further away from that more rhythmically challenging, more kind of death metal-y complexity in favor of a stronger, more drawn out, more atmospheric for its time melodicism. And those harmonies over the main riffs are just so fucking satisfying, and they really take you to another world the way that music ought to. And I utterly love this thing. It's not much to speak of. Like, there's not a lot of music on here. There's an acoustic intro. There's 2 super, super great songs, and then a cover. But just, this is one of my favorite EPs for it being the stepping stone for me into what is now my life, and one of my favorite bands. And I'll show you the reissue of that. This one isn't very different whatsoever from that original. I hope the light here is working good. It's looking pretty good so far, I think. Band photo on there. Century Media catalog, whatever. I gotta re-sleeve this stuff because I don't have a lot of room to work with here. Okay, so that was 96. Sorkbas Forte Vigar Flow came out on Necropolis as well. So then 2 years again pass, and the drummer Karsten Larson leaves and starts Mythlotin. And they found a new drummer right away in Jukka Peterson, who also plays in Retaliation, or at least did. I haven't really kept up with the history on Retaliation. They're one of those bands that just cranks out material a whole lot, and it just kind of all sounds the same to me. There's The Execution. That album is fucking fantastic. And I will say, in Retaliation's favor, the song Genocide Angels is one of the best fucking grindcore songs I've ever heard. But so in comes Morth, as he's known on this album, and I think he plays as Morth on a couple other things. It's escaping me right now, but Jukka Peterson comes up on Slaughter Son, and like, I don't know, there's something more. He's an extremely talented drummer. His 1 foot blasting is amazing. He's super, super tight, but I feel like he's one of those drummers that's so talented that he can just hop into a band and crank out material with them that suits it. But I feel like the drummer before him was there during the writing process of those songs and maybe had a more integral relationship with the music than Morth did with Slaughters. So therein lies a little bit of my discontent with Slaughter's Son. The drums feel just a little less natural than the guy who played with them before him. He's super talented, super fast. I do think the music is served quite well by his playing, but I do wish there was just a little bit more eccentricities and a little bit more complexity to the drumming on Slaughter Son. So Necropolis releases in '98. Good luck finding a copy of this original for under like $100, but luckily Century Media reissued this again in 2014. I think all these reissues were 2014. So now going back to Abyss Studios, again, I feel like at this point, 2 years after the EP, by this time he's cranked out so many albums that sound so much like one another, and for me it sounds so much more digital, so much more clinical, and I kind of have a hard time feeling familiar with the band that I once loved on Slaughterson. So that's kind of where I've sat with Slaughterson for many, many, many years. I actually, when it came out, I called Necropolis Records up, and I was one of the first people to order a copy of it, according to Joker at the time. So I wound up actually getting rid of it. I had an OG copy of it, and I kind of regret it. But for some reason, once I got into like brutal music when I was about 23, 24 or so, I was like, all that fucking melodic Swedish shit, get the fuck out of here. So I got rid of the EP actually, and Slaughterson. I was done with it. I can't fucking believe who I was at that time. But again, reissued by Century Media on wax. This is a great album. It's very front loaded. In retrospect, I went back and listened to this again last week, and I actually found myself liking it a lot more than I expected to, I think. The drums sound fucking great. I will give them that, but again, just overall the sound and mixing just sounds so digital and so processed and just so unnatural that I just kind of have a hard time loving it, while I do like it. The first couple of songs are fantastic. And then you get to an intermission point where I feel like the quality kind of drops off, and I kind of always had this suspicion that maybe they wrote like another EP, and then the last couple of songs on here were just kind of thrown on and added at the last minute to make this a full length for some reason. I've always wondered, I guess, if Necropolis had a hand in telling bands what to do. I really don't know. I hope I get a chance to find that out sometime. But this is actually a double LP. It's a great record. I don't want to take anything away from people who fucking absolutely love this album, but it is not without its flaws. It's not a perfect, amazing album that I hoped for after Sorg Pasvarte, Bigger Flow, if I'm being honest. So, then you get to the point where, what the fuck's going on with Dawn? So, a couple of years pass, which, you know, isn't weird. I feel like back in the day, in the late 90s, early 2000s, bands would go 3 or 4 years without an album, and you wouldn't think anything weird about it. Nowadays, if a band doesn't crank out an album every year, what the fuck's going on? I try not to expect that of any artist, but it's really competitive these days to crank albums out as often as other bands who can. So anyways, a couple years pass, and then we get a single called The Fourfold Furnace, and this is supposed to be from the forthcoming Dawn album. And they did a video for it. That's how the song was released. The Fourfold Furnace never, as far as I know, made it on any physical format. It was just maybe a YouTube video, or like, this was before YouTube, honestly, so maybe it came out on like Morpheus or something. I'd be curious to know like how that actually went down, or if I'm off on a couple years or something like that. Anyways, it was a fantastic song, and it was again a different drummer, if I'm not mistaken. And this time the drummer was Thomas Asklund, who played with Dissection, Dark Funeral, and honestly, Thomas Asklund, I think, is one of the most boring, just uninteresting drummers I've ever heard in maybe European metal. Yeah, dude he's just a tapper. I'm just unimpressed with how minimalistic his playing is and uninteresting his playing is. And like, I don't know, I just kind of have a hard time as a drummer myself, having a lot of respect for drummers who are just hired hands and will play in any band if you pay them enough. And I don't feel like he has a lot of artistry. Okay, I'm seeing it. Okay. There's a giant field of pasture on the other side of our property here. But here, I'll just go ahead and show you. And so we're seeing a lot of birds, a lot of rare birds that we aren't used to in the past. So this is a lot of fallen timber that we're going to be turning into gardening and stuff. This is the amount of work that I'm fucking faced with, guys. So get a good look at that. But so beyond our property there is a giant pasture, and there's a shit ton of birds doing weird stuff. The amount of bird activity out here is just nuts. I'll wrap that up. Thomas Askelin is a boring drummer. Apparently, I think he might still be in the band working on this album. But, I mean, anyways, how do you even... I don't even know how to, like, think of this forthcoming Dawn album that has been forthcoming for 20 years? I don't know. What I do know, though, is that Dawn are nearing the completion of this new record. Frederick Anderson has kind of emerged on social media and shared some evidence that there is an album forthcoming. So I am very excited for that. He shared some samples the other day, so that is very promising. So we might actually get a Dawn album pretty soon. It seems actually pretty real. We've had like comments and interviews with Frederick Anderson over the years, who is like the main mastermind, as far as I understand, of Dawn. So we've had a lot of evidence that this album is actually in the works, but especially this year, actually, there's been hard evidence. You can hear samples from the album. I think it's gonna happen. I don't know who would release it or whatnot, but I'm pretty stoked. It's pretty rare that a band that I grew up with reforms or whatever puts out an album after a hiatus, and I'm still interested, honestly. I guess I have been holding out hope a little bit, but I don't feel like I've been like exhausting myself in anticipation. And the samples that I've heard so far, if the Fourfold Furnace is any evidence, yeah, I'm stoked, but that was 20 years ago again. So the samples, though, that I have heard do sound really good, and I will afford one of my favorite bands a little bit of slack if this album isn't like blow me away amazing. It's fine, but if they would like make an okay record and then maybe make an amazing record after that, you know, great. I hope the best for them. I hope that's what we get. So we'll see what happens with this forthcoming Dawn album. I don't really know what label, I don't know when, I don't know what it would be like, but I do feel like it's going to happen. So I'm excited. I hope you're excited. It's a great time in anticipation to check out Dawn if you haven't already. Matt, I'm looking right down your nose. So